Hey everybody, Steve here, and today we're going to talk about a question I've been getting from a number of people, and that question is, how is apartment living different here in Korea than it is in the United States? And it is very different. I've lived in a couple apartments in the United States. Of course, being in the military, I've had a number of soldiers that worked under me that lived in apartments. And you hear the horror stories of the constant fighting and bickering. And usually there's a separation, and it's based on income. So the lower the rent of an apartment complex, the more problems you'll have with noise complaints, fights, people being disrespectful, so on and so forth. How does that pair up? And even then, from what I remember and what other people have told me, apartment living is just not something that you do. You would rather be in a townhouse or ultimately have your own house. So that way you have peace and quiet, because of neighbors and in apartments above you, below you, to the left and right, usually cause a lot of problems. It seems kind of a negative on the most part for living in apartments in the United States. I don't know. What is your experience with apartment living in the United States? Put that in the comment section down below, because what I've seen, what other people experience, can be two different things. So I guess with what we see here in Korea, because we do have some experience of living in apartments, and we lived in some, I guess you would call it, lower rent income apartments, where basically it's like a studio apartment or a 1 or a 2 bedroom apartment. And how do the noise complaints, how does that compare here in Korea to apartments in the United States? I can definitely say, based off our experiences, is that people are more respectful here in Korea than they are in the United States. And there's less noise complaints than there is in the United States. So, and I appreciate that a lot. And being a foreigner, I think it also depends on the makeup of the apartment building. So I remember living in apartments in a Korean economy where it ends up that I was the minority. So people were kind of standoffish. Of course, even then, didn't experience loud, noisy neighbors. Maybe once in a great while, very rare. But then again, the majority of the apartment complex was Korean nationals, very few Americans. And the few Americans that were there, myself included, it ends up that our experiences is that we were respectful. We didn't party loud and throw beer bottles and, yell and scream and play the stereo until 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. So, yeah, I would say there is a definite difference between Korean apartments and American apartments. And usually, from what I've seen in mixed apartment scenarios, is that the higher the rent you pay, the more respectful people are when it comes to the American side of the house. Koreans haven't experienced much, if at any, at the new apartment that we're at, of Koreans being loud or noisy or yelling. But then for that matter, we have a larger apartment that we bought. So we're on the kind of a higher level end if we're renting that apartment. And it also depends on the makeup of the apartment itself. So for example, in the apartments that we live in, you have 33 pyong, which is the size equates to about, 1,100 square feet, 3 bedroom, 2 bath. And when you go up and use the elevator, you get off the elevator and you have access to a number of apartments. So you have more apartments on that floor level than you do with like our apartment. which is 44 pyong, which is like 1,600 square feet. Where in our case, if you go up the elevator, you get off and there's only 2 units. So we have our unit and then the elevator, and then after that, there's across is our neighbors. So there's only 2 units on that floor. So you got to take that into consideration as well. When we were staying at the Paradilla, you would get off and it was a 1-bedroom efficiency apartment. You can check out the video on it. I did a tour and all that stuff. You can see the size and the layout and so on and so forth. But when you got off the elevator, I mean, there was multiple apartment units that were accessible on that floor. With that, we did experience more noise and more parties, but then again, most of the people living there were Americans or foreigners. They're not Korean nationals. So, you know, there's people from Thailand, people from Philippines, people from the United States, Nigeria. I think I saw a couple of Russian-speaking people coming in and Arabic people. But usually, we saw a lot more noise disturbances and parties and things like that with that makeup of people. Now, I don't know if it's because of the age, that a lot of these people are younger. I'm 56. In that scenario, we had a lot of noise complaints. We had a lot of parties that would go on till midnight, 1, 2 o'clock in the morning. Luckily, they were apartments that were a couple of floors down below us, but they had their windows open and you could still hear the music and yelling and the shouting. The other thing you need to take a look at is where your apartment is located. So in our situation is located close to Camp Humphreys, but it's far enough away that we're away from where you've got restaurants, where you've got bars and clubs and places that sell alcohol. And on Friday and Saturday and Sunday nights, you know, it ends up a lot of people drinking, a lot of people having fun, and usually having fun in that manner is not conducive to peace and quiet. So the location and where your apartment or proposed apartment building is can make a big difference depending on where it is within the city. So if you're smack dab in the middle of a bunch of clubs, restaurants, places that are open, you know, after hours eating places that sell alcohol, yeah, you might want to check out and just kind of walk around the apartment building that you're interested in during, you know, 10, 11, 12, 1, 2, to get on a Friday night, Saturday night, to get the feel of what it's going to be like during those hours. So really it comes down to common sense and really plan out and do some due diligence in regards to, you know, where is the apartment building at? What is the makeup of the personnel that are in the apartments? Is it located in a part of the city where there's lots of clubs and bars and so on and so forth? Or is it a little bit further away? And then the other thing, when you ask about apartments, do a tour of the apartment. If you see people, stop and ask them, hey, how is this apartment? How is it for noise? You know, for us, that was a big deal. We wanted something that was nice and quiet. We didn't want, you know, the drunks and the parties until 1, 2 o'clock in the morning. And so we really enjoy where we're at. Thankfully, our next door neighbors, because remember, there's only 2 units on our floor. Our next door neighbors is a young officer couple, or at least a young officer. The husband is an officer, is married, they've got 2 young kids, probably around 2 to 5 years old, somewhere around there. And they're very respectful, they're very quiet. You hear their kids very sparingly every once in a while, but it's during the day, you know, you hear the kids playing inside and stuff. But since our apartment is a newer apartment, the insulation in our apartment building is a lot better than the insulation like we had in the Paradilla. The walls were kind of thin, the insulation wasn't that good, so you could hear people next door on your left and right, up and down and all that. So that's something else to take into consideration. Generally, the older the apartment, the worse the insulation will be. The newer the apartment, the better the insulation, the more sound or the less sound that you'll hear from your neighbors all around. Now, something else to think about if you're in an apartment like ours close to Camp Humphreys, is that you'll have military people or personnel moving in and out of those apartment buildings about every 1 or 2 years. So there's this current influx of people moving in, moving out, and the great neighbors that we have now that are respectful and quiet, you know, when they leave after their command sponsorship of 2 years, that might change to somebody who's command sponsored and they're loud as all get out. The parents don't discipline the kids. You know, the kids are crazy and wild. We hope that's not the case, but there always is that possibility. Now, I had some people ask me, I want to come to Korea and I want to buy an apartment. What is a good apartment to go to? As if I'm some kind of authority on where to live here in Korea. I cannot answer that for you. I cannot even, you know, I can say where our experiences and share where we've been and where we're at now. But as far as like trying to make any determination on where you should live for you and your family, I just can't do it. You know, there's age differences, there's cultural differences. You know, maybe you don't mind being in a place where, you know, in the heart of the city where it's you know, always going, music going all the time. Maybe that doesn't bother you. For us, you know, we're a little bit more quiet and reserved. But my recommendation is that you come to Korea, and if you're thinking about retiring here in Korea or a long-term visa, then just rent out places, find out different parts of the city that interest you, and then make your determination from there. I also want to take this time to say thank you for watching the video, and if you could do me a favor, hit that like button, hit the subscribe and the bell so that you'll be notified of any future videos. Really appreciate it. Let's get back to the program. Now, the one last thing that I want to say about apartment living here in Korea versus the United States is generally Korean apartments are quieter than American apartments, in my opinion and in our experiences. If you do come to Korea, don't be the ugly American. Don't be the loud and obnoxious foreigner that comes in and has parties until 1, 2 o'clock in the morning. If nobody else is doing it, that might be an indication that it's not socially acceptable. As you can see here, this is a notice in our apartment building that there are quiet hours for the apartment, and you can actually get fined for being too loud in your apartment. You can also notice that cigarette smoking is frowned upon in apartments. So again, there's a lot of consideration that comes into play when you live in an apartment building. And I think the more respect that you give, the more that you'll get. And it's about a peaceful coexistence here in Korea. And eventually you'll get to a place or an age like we did to where you'll appreciate the peace and quiet. All right, so that's going to be it for this video. Take care, and we'll see you on the next one.